everyone, a big welcome back to the Nick Elston Show, Season 6, go figure, Episode 2, and continuing the success of the launch of this season with Rohan Sivajotti last week. There was a diversity and inclusion theme around professional sports and the world of financial stuff. This is bringing you the same theme, but on a very different angle, but the person behind everything as well. Give it up for Captain Douggie Ward. Woo! Hey!
Hello, how are you?
Very good, thank you very much. Great to have you on.
So, thank you very much for inviting me.
You're very well. I had to. I mean, it's just kind of one of those universal kick up the asses that I need when I heard what you were saying at the event that we met at last year. And for context, I was speaking for an event, and we both worked for the Ministry of Defence, and Douggie was delivering virtual, and he was a speaker before me. So I came in to get mic'd up and stuff. And my attention was really caught to what Douggie was sharing, and not just the clarity and the candor with which he shared, but also such an important kind of take on a topic which can still be considered a taboo, especially within the kind of the military environment generally, frontline environment generally. And above all, he just seemed a really nice guy, just a really great vibe. So delighted to have Douggie on. So tell us who you are, what you do, and where you're from. Think of like you're on the chase or something like that.
Okay, yeah. So my name's Douggie Ward. I'm a captain in the Royal Navy. Joined the Royal Navy on leaving university. So university sponsored through by the Royal Navy, and joined them. And I've been a serving frontline officer now since the late 1990s. So yeah, it's been brilliant. Not looked back to at all. Wouldn't change any of it.
Amazing. And there was so much love in the room for not just kind of the things you're talking about, but also for you generally. And it's great to see that kind of respect for somebody who's sharing a voice within any sector comes to that.
Yes, no, absolutely. Because the event I was talking about, I think it was trying to remember whether it was LGBT History Month or what the event was now. But I was giving my story.
International Men's Day, wasn't it? I think it was
International
November.
Men's Day. That's right. Yeah. Yes, of course. And I was giving my perspective as an out gay man serving in the Royal Navy. But yes, you're absolutely right. It was a really good event and a really good crowd. And what I liked was the opportunity to talk about diversity and inclusion matters in an environment where you may not have expected all of the attendees of that environment to have been to an LGBT focused talk before, because quite often in the D&I sphere it can be very segmented. So if you're into LGBT matters, you go to the LGBT events, but you may not go to the race events, or you may not go to the faith events, so on and so forth. But to have an event where we could talk about all of these matters in one forum, and raise awareness across the board is brilliant.
Absolutely, and it's kind of like there's clubs you need to be members of, but I kind of get what you mean with that. And very often, actually, sometimes that can be a challenge where things like mental health, mental illness, well-being can be kind of brought into the same sphere as diversity and inclusion and sexuality and gender and race, all the other things that we talk about. And very often that can water down the impact. But as you said, for that event, it was brilliant because it broadened the audience and the dynamic of the audience.
Well, I think especially for things like mental health. I mean, mental health, it doesn't care who you are, how you identify, what your faith is, your background is. It affects all of us. So actually, it's so important to discuss these. It's called these intersectional issues, because we're all more than just one thing. We are all more than just one label. But ultimately, we are all just humans, and we share the same experiences, no matter who we are or what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. And from a non-serving environment, I feel like I should salute every time I talk to you because it's kind of the captain thing.
No, it's all right. I'm not. You don't have to do that.
That's cool. Just checking. So no disrespect intended. So yeah, actually, my granddad was in the Navy. He was on a minesweeper, so on a minesweeper during the Second World War, and it's interesting the amount of stories, and I still have the image now of. He was on a ship called HMS Cadmus, so I've still got the image of the ship, and it's just played such a big part, and it's quite a nice synchronicity of having this very different conversation about the same backdrop. And we certainly will come on to that for sure. But this is about you, actually. This is about the person behind the brand and everything else that you represent. Tell us about baby Douggie. Tell us about growing up and education and environment. How was life like right at the beginning?
I'm born in the New Forest in the south coast of England. Very sadly, my natural mother died about a year after I was born. So she had cancer, but obviously back in the 70s, survival rates were a lot lower. And then my dad remarried, and actually remarried. So my stepmom, her husband was killed in an industrial accident, and of course, back in the 70s, widowers had very few rights. So there was a risk that me and my sister would be taken into care. And on my stepmom, she had two children as well, was struggling to bring up two children in a world that was still, the man was the breadwinner. So they ended up meeting, they ended up getting married. So I've got a sort of like a non-standard family, but hey, what's a standard family? Grew up in the New Forest. So my dad was a civil servant, and my mum was mainly a housewife, but it's probably the most important job that you can ever do, and also worked part-time as a florist. And then from there, grew up and got to school, and was thinking about what do I do, where do I go, and a good friend at school, his brother had joined the Navy, and I heard all of his stories of traveling the world, and I thought that sounds like the life for me. And then I was very fortunate, went to university to study geography, and I was very fortunate to be sponsored through by the Navy. And then it was quite easy. So I've never written a CV in my life. I mean, I've got to where I am today, a captain in the Royal Navy, on the basis of filling out a coupon in the back of the Sunday Times, and then to say I've got an interest in joining up. And obviously there's a selection process, but it's funny. But for sitting next to that chap at school, who knows where I'd have ended up. So that's sort of like, that's that aspect of my life. And the other aspect, which is what I hinted at, is so an out gay man. But I only came out in my 30s. I think 35 when I came out, because I genuinely didn't know before. I certainly didn't know age 6 or 8 or 12 that I was gay. So that's a sort of another part of my life. For sort of 35 onwards is learning to be and to exist as a gay man in a service, whereas you sort of alluded to at the start, where prior to the year 2000 it was illegal to be gay in the armed forces.
Is that right? I never knew that. Is that right?
Yeah. So it used to be the law of the land, that you couldn't serve and be openly gay. So when I joined up, it was in the final few years of when it was an administrative discharge, but previously it'd even been an imprisonable offence. Wow. And then the law changed in 2000, and very quickly the attitudes changed. And here we are today with all of the armed forces, be it the Royal Navy, the Army, or the Air Force, all having taken part in the Stonewall Workplace Equality Index over the past couple of years, with the Royal Navy achieving a top 10 position in that index, which is no mean feat. And it just shows you how far we have come. And now the Ministry of Defence is working through a programme of effectively looking at how they can better support those individuals who were discharged back in the day, and how they can be better supported going forward, because they're still part of the broader veteran community. And they left for reasons which nowadays would be, a completely unacceptable reason to be discharged, because we value the service of everybody. Yeah.
And we've had, over the seasons, we've had a lot of people talking about kind of sexuality in the time where they decided to personally come out, or to even have that kind of inner conversation with themselves. but no one's really spoken about then that decision to take it into an environment, a professional environment where that has whole different kind of implications, and doubly so now you've explained what you have. How did that kind of situation play out for you? As I said, it's something that you came out fairly later in your personal life.
Yeah.
Taking that leap into doing that in a professional environment, how did that play out for you, and what were your kind of fears and thoughts around that?
So one of the I'm a qualified barrister, which the Navy put me through my training. So I'm a naval barrister. And it's a very small community. There's only 32 of us, about 32 of us in the branch. And I knew that if I told one of my close friends and associates, that very quickly other people would find out, and then I would lose control of my story and my reasoning.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I decided to do when I eventually decided to come out, having sort of recognized for myself that I was a gay man, but not being open with other people, I thought, well, no, I have to tell other people. I can't carry on the way I am. So I actually sent a single email to all of my colleagues, and I started the email by telling them that I had something I needed to tell them about, that I've been thinking about it for a long period of time, and so on and so forth. And then I said, I'm coming out as a gay man, but it doesn't change who I am. I'm still the same Douggie that you knew before. It's just now you know something else about me. And lots of people came back to me, and they said when they first saw the email come into their box, and they read the first paragraph, they all thought I was going to resign. They all thought that it was something to do with that. They never foresaw what the actual punchline was. But they were all so supportive, incredibly supportive, and even some of the people who I had thought may not be quite so supportive, to be honest, they were huge. Everyone was hugely supportive. But then within about half an hour, I did get a phone call from the one naval barrister who I hadn't included on the email. And the reason I hadn't included that individual on the email was actually they were the second Sea Lord, so sort of like the second highest position in the Navy. And as an admiral, we probably had a busy day anyway and didn't really need to know, so on and so forth. And I got a phone call from him saying, Douggie, I've heard your news. I just wanted to phone up to say it doesn't change, how we think of you and who you are, and, so on and so forth, which sort of proves the point why I think I was right to send the email out in the first place. Because coming out is such a deeply personal thing. And it's nice to have control of that process. Now, some people don't want that. Some people want to tell someone who they know will tell everybody else on their behalf. But I wanted to own it because I felt for me that was the right thing for me to do. But wow. But the really interesting bit, and the sort of linking back to when it was illegal to serve as a LGBT person in the forces, was that a lot of my friends, my straight friends, said that actually that when the law changed, it didn't just change for the lesbians and the gays and the bisexual people in the Navy. It changed for everybody, because everybody knew that there were LGBT people serving in the Navy, and they were friends with them, and they valued them as colleagues. And actually, by not informing the service police, they themselves were committing an offence. So when the law changed, it changed for everybody, because it wasn't our law. It wasn't the law that the services dreamt up. It was the law of the land. It was, it was Parliament that came up with the law. It wasn't, the armed forces as such. Yeah. So when the law changed, attitudes changed really quickly, because society had moved on, and we had finally, the law had finally caught up with society moving on.
Wow. We've all had some anxiety over sending that email, but that email, wow. Yeah. That must have hovered over send for a little while, maybe.
Yeah, it did. And my immediate boss phoned me up, and, we had a really good chat. Both of us ended up, it was quite emotional, but it was just so nice to see the support. And it was a result of getting that support and being so welcomed, that I then put myself forward to be the chair of the Royal Navy and Royal Marines LGBT network.
That's taking
because
Go Big or Go Home to a whole new level, isn't it?
yeah, it was. I mean, it really is. I sort of like jumped right into it because I just wanted to ensure that everybody else, if they chose to come out, would hopefully get the same reception. We can only do that by education, and that's the point of these forums, is to, it's not only to support the community, but to educate the wider community. Or if they're for individuals who didn't want to come out, and of course entirely personal, you don't have to be out, was that they knew that they had somewhere they could go to for a listening ear service, for advice. And that was all. I didn't set the network up. I just took over the reins when the chair became free, because I just felt it was such an important thing to do, and to give something back, I felt was really important.
Massive respect. I mean, that's an amazing thing. I mean, that's the professional relationship side of things. Was it something that was always known in your personal relationships, or was it something that was also new to other people?
No, so so I was married at that point to my then wife Carol, 2 children. And when I married Carol in the first place, I genuinely didn't know. I genuinely didn't know that I was gay. I knew life wasn't black and white, but I genuinely did not believe I was gay. And we got married, and say had everything that I'd seen on TV and identified with on TV is what families have. The Labrador dog, the big TV, and all the nice car, the nice house. And as time went on, whilst I didn't have any issue with any of that, as it were, I just internally, I just didn't feel happy. Or as happy as I should be, and I needed to get to the bottom of that, and that took a few years of soul searching, and then eventually I came to the conclusion and realised that I was in fact I was a gay man. So I was to the so one end of the spectrum, and so I also had to break that news to my wife, which was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, obviously. And there were lots of tears there. But again, I got a really, I didn't have the negative reaction that I feared. I wasn't kicked out of the house. I wasn't walloped with a frying pan and all that sort of stuff. And even to this day, we still have a really good relationship, because we're still a parenting unit. We still have 2 daughters who we're responsible for bringing up. We're just a different sort of family now. Now I've got a husband. We still live in the same town, but just a mile and a half away. And we still bring up still bring up the girls together. I mean, the scary thing is they're now nearly 18. The eldest will be 18 fairly shortly, and the youngest will be 16. And it's just more like, where did the time go? How did this happen?
Crazy, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, as
we're recording this, the first month of this year has gone like that. It's literally gone, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Again, I'm genuinely so grateful for you sharing with such candor and clarity. And the reason is because I know this will reach people that need to hear this right now, for sure. Your relationship and how was it taken by your daughters was obviously, that must have been tough at the time, maybe, but how did that work out as well? How did that play out?
I think it's probably more
share that.
Yeah, I think probably my hit my eldest daughter probably harder because she was older. But as time goes on, that's there's no she's just like any other teenage daughter, to be honest. Now she's at that stage where if I can offer a taxi service and a banking service, then that's pretty much that's what dads are there for. And then for my younger daughter, say at the time was a lot younger, and I didn't move out for years because there was no reason to. But when I met my husband to be, and we decided that we were going to get married, she was, to be honest, we were quite materialistic about it all. She was on the grounds of, well, does he have parents? I was like, yes. Does he have grandparents? Yes. And she was like, so will I get more presents? Well, that's how you want to think about it. Absolutely fine. So as time went on, they would come and stay with me anyway, over weekends and so on and so forth. So it's just they just now have an bigger extended family. And my other half especially takes my youngest. She's a lot more into shopping than I am. He's into shopping, and so they both go shopping together. They go, they do all that stuff together. So yeah, she's got a mum and a dad and a stepdad.
Fantastic.
And
with all, like I say, you've kind of recollected the positive engagement and the kind of the support. And have you ever had any kind of pushback or kind of openly strong pushback for kind of doing what you do and the stance you've taken?
So I've been very fortunate. I had a very easy coming out process, and so I've not had personal pushback from people that I know. Been really well supported. In life generally, though, as an out gay man, you are aware. You always have to be constantly alert as to the environment where you are. So public displays of affection between me and my husband, you really, if we're meeting each other at the airport or the train station or work or whatever, where it's probably fairly standard for straight couples to hold hands in public or to give a peck on the cheek and no one bats an eyelid. As a gay man, or if for lesbians the same, anything like that, you have to be so certain of your environment, because you can face reactions where people get very anti very quickly, and even in cities where you think, well, cosmopolitan cities, this isn't going to be an issue. The reality is that LGBT hate crime is on the rise, and people are, hospitalized just for holding hands with the person that they love, or even, so it was last year, might have been the year before now, the lesbian couple on the bus who faced some horrendous homophobic abuse, just for sitting with each other on a bus. And that's still the sad reality, sadly.
It's horrible to hear from you that the kind of that stuff is on the rise at a time where you're hoping it would be going the other way.
Yeah, and I've tried to work out why it's on the rise, and maybe it's because in some ways LGBT people are now more visible in society. So whereas before we'd hide ourselves away, we're now more visible, and therefore we're there more as a target, I think, sadly. Obviously, that doesn't excuse it. I'm not going to become invisible to stop it from happening. It's just something you just have to be constantly alert to. But hopefully one day society will change. But it sort of shows that even if you have legislation which is pretty supportive, you still need to change society, and not everyone in society is on the same page, sadly.
Profile Me is a super shareable mobile application designed to help professionals grow their personal brand. Proudly paperless, this powerful tool packs the power of web, social media, and messaging into one beautifully designed interface that offers a unique and human-centric way to connect and build trust with clients. Easy to share on any platform and easy to save to any phone's home screen. With Profile Me, getting referred has never been easier.
Absolutely. And it's an interesting kind of time with Rohan, who was on episode 1 of this season. He was saying that he's big into cricket in a big way. He was playing, and he was the only person of color on the team. And this is like literally 2 years ago, so it's very recent in that sense. And one of the opposition bowlers were basically called him racially aggravated word, very insulting. Rohan was saying, as somebody who doesn't like confrontation, he kind of goes back into that kind of hide mode where he won't engage with it. Whereas the person he was playing cricket with on his team, like a young white guy, took his hat off, took the bat off, and really confronted this guy. And luckily that guy got kind of disciplined and suspended and that kind of stuff. But unless these things actually affect you, I'm amazed by both of those examples, the one that Rohan shared, the one that you shared. This stuff still happens because it's not something that happens in my world. So it's only by raising these things do people recognize that actually this stuff is still very real for people.
Yes, and that's the real challenge, because especially you see with my transgender colleagues, both in out in society. There's a lot of people who say, well, it's not real, it's not an issue, because they've never experienced it, or they've never actually spoken to someone who identifies as trans. And I would ask, if you ever get the opportunity, sit down with someone who is trans, because coming out as a gay man is ultimate. Well, some people do have a rough ride, but if you're coming out as saying, actually, I'm in the completely wrong body, let alone your sexual orientation, which is separate from your gender identity, and that loads of people just can't understand it because they've never seen it. They certainly haven't lived it. But just because you haven't lived an experience, it doesn't mean that experience is invalid. And that's what I find struggling sometimes, is that people. There is a category of people that, even though there's a category. The vast majority say, I might not have experienced that myself, but I can understand that, and that's I can see that. But there's a small section of society who say, just because it's not my experience, therefore it doesn't exist at all. And it's how you break through that. I think. But also, sorry, I was just going to say the point that it was his colleague who picked up and did the challenge.
Yeah.
We've got some really good bystander training. It's called active bystander training, and it's how do you respond to those incidents when you see it? Do you, as the individual, take it up there and then? And if you feel safe and secure in doing that, then you can do that. Or is it a case of pausing a moment and mentioning something later in another environment where it might be less heated, or having a friend do that on your behalf, or a colleague? So yeah, there's loads of different sort of like strategies to how you respond, and there's no one strategy fits all. But it was nice to see that on that occasion, a colleague was prepared just to stand in there and there, and say something, even though Rohan himself didn't feel comfortable. So yeah, it's important that we don't let these things go unchallenged.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know this is a big topic, and obviously potentially a big generalism as well. But why is it that people still have this level of, is it lack of education? Is it ignorance? Is it fear? Is it what drives the thing that makes things that are different to them make them aggressive or defensive or sensitive?
In some ways, I think it goes all the way back to sort of like to basic human culture and existence. We grew up in small family tribes and small units, and anything that was outside of our understanding was to be feared, and people from outside of our understanding were to be feared. So I think ultimately it comes back to probably some primal sort of fear mechanism. So you can't necessarily blame people, but it would be better if people, I'd prefer if people were not so blinkered when in these matters today, and actually, try to learn from the experiences of others, because no one is trying to force someone to be something that they're not, but just have an understanding and acceptance that other people are out there and other experiences are equally valid to their own experiences, because these people will have equally valid experiences. But it's accepting that everyone has an equally valid experience. Do
you think there's a fear around asking questions because of the rise of kind of social conditions such as like cancel culture, that kind of stuff? Do you think we're either kind of meant to feel like we need to go along with stuff even if we don't understand it? Or I think what I'm trying to say is we're afraid of asking questions. For example, as a 45-year-old white straight guy, I didn't understand the importance of pronouns. Now, a lot of people from my generation and back may actually go to that kind of fear response of just kind of blinkering kind of. But my way of dealing with it is I actually got somebody on the show and we talked about this very openly. And by the end of it, I educated myself to have an opinion. I can understand, and I think if we took that approach, that, and I'm sure you would be open to people asking you genuine questions to try and understand, then surely that's the best way about it. But I appreciate not everybody has that response. My response is to want to know more and get curious.
Yeah, I think sometimes people do want to ask questions, but they're afraid of saying the wrong thing, or asking something that they shouldn't ask. Now, clearly, there are questions which are completely inappropriate, because if you wouldn't ask your straight mate that question, then don't ask, don't ask your gay mate, your bi mate, or your trans mate that question. But genuinely, if you are coming from the right angle because you want to learn, you want to understand, yes, you may get some of the terminology incorrect to start with, or you might ask a question that's a bit clumsy. But if you're doing it with the right heart, the person that you're talking to will, they'll be happy to say, well, actually, probably shouldn't phrase it like that, but I get what you're going at, and this is the answer to the question that I think you were trying to ask. And so I don't think but I do think people are scared of getting it wrong because they don't want to offend. But I actually think probably it's more important to ask and to learn, rather than to not ask for fear of offending, to be honest.
Absolutely. I think it relates to what you said about kind of the session that we were both at, that by mixing, or by having a more diverse audience from different kind of opinions, stances, walks of life, ways of life, that it took away that kind of echo chamber effect that we can have by only kind of engaging with people that are just like us. Yeah.
So when I was in my last job, because the naval officers or military personnel, we change jobs every couple of years. So you're always on the move. But in my last job, I hosted a series of LGBTI events. And I got in some outside speakers, so people like Reverend Richard Coles, Evan Davies from the BBC, Ruth Davidson, and we hosted these events. But we found it was always the same sort of people who came to that event. I had hoped with a few sort of famous names, we would get other people saying, "Oh, I know that name, I'll come along." But in the end, what we ended up doing was I got permission from the boss at the time, a chap called Admiral Ben Key, who's now the first Sea Lord, and he gave me a 5-minute slot in the weekly HQ-wide team update. So over the course of Pride Month, I managed to get volunteers from within the headquarters to speak about their lived experiences.
Wow.
And by doing that, it made it not just about a celebrity, living in their what you think of their wonderful celebrity world, but it made it about the people sat next to you. And each week, over the course of Pride Month, they gave a 5-minute dit about their experience as a gay man, as a lesbian man, as an ally, so on and so forth. And it just brought it to a broader audience than it had ever been brought to before, because whilst all my colleagues were really good people, they probably wouldn't have taken time out of their busy day to go to an LGBT themed event, because they may have thought it wasn't to do with them. But by making it about their colleagues, it was to do with them.
Absolutely.
And again, people came back and said, I had no idea. I had no idea that was still the lived experience, or so on and so forth. It was really, really interesting, really interesting. And obviously, great thanks to the Admiral for letting us host it. But again, that shows you how much time things have changed in the 20 odd years since the year 2000.
What I guess, and again, I can't say it enough. Thank you very much for sharing with such kind of candor and clarity about this stuff. It's amazing to hear this experience. I know this will be impactful for a lot of people. Your general Navy career, kind of like, how does kind of like the nuts and bolts of life in the Navy work and look? Is there lots of travel? What does your day-to-day look like?
So it's interesting. First and foremost, it's a brilliant career, and I would say to anyone, it is fantastic. It depends on the branches joined. So you can either join as a warfare officer, And they're the ones who ultimately go on to command the warships. But they fight the external battle, as it were. You can join as an engineer, whether that's a marine engineer or a weapons engineer, so looking after the engineering side of life. I joined as a logistics officer, so I was looking after all of the things that really, impact on people, be it their pay, their food, their clothing. The medical services that they receive, because when we're at sea, we're effectively a floating town, and we have to function independently. So there's a huge amount of opportunity for travel. Obviously, we are a navy, and 70% of the ocean, 70% of the world is water. So the opportunity to travel is incredible. So I myself, I've sailed in the North Atlantic, the South Atlantic, into the Pacific, the Mediterranean, the Indian Ocean. There aren't many oceans that I've not been to, but I've also served in shore establishments around the world as well. So it's been incredible. And some of the things that I sort of take for granted because it happens in the job, I know when you speak to my civilian friends, they're just like, wow. But one of the nicest things and some of the most enjoyable jobs I've had is when working in international coalitions. So working with people from other countries, other armed forces, because again, you then realise that actually we're all far more alike than we are different, and to just get that cross filtering of cultures and understanding with people that you wouldn't otherwise meet has been really good. So yeah, it's so how your day ends up looking depends on which work strand you go down. So I'd say I joined as a logistics officer. I then qualified as a submariner, did my time in the submarine service. Then I put myself forward for legal training, qualified as a naval barrister. So I've done a mix of criminal trials within the armed forces, both prosecuting and defending, operational law type work as well. It's been, really, really good. Really enjoyed it. I'm now back in a logistics job, so there's huge variety. Because, as I say, every 2 years, 3 years, you change job, you move on to a new challenge. So you never get bored. You never get bored.
Experience.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Love it.
So away from professional life, how do you like to switch off? How do you recharge your batteries? What do you love to do?
So I am an avid runner. So for me, running is what I do to keep myself sane. I used to be faster than I was now. So now I do it for pleasure rather than for pace. I'm still harking back to the days when I was a lot faster. But I've finally accepted that those days have gone. I love getting up on the hills in Scotland. So home is in Scotland. Work home is wherever work make me work, but home is Scotland. That's where I live with my other half. Love getting up into the Scottish mountains, whether that's walking or running. That's sort of like my main pleasure. I'm a bit of I like a bit of classical music. I've gone old school, bought myself a vinyl record player for Christmas.
Nice.
So starting to get back into vinyl LPs. In fact, I bought my eldest daughter a record player for Christmas, and she was asking me how you fast forwarded and how you got to the track you wanted to. It's like, no, you start at the start and you flip it halfway through and then you end at the end, and that's all you can do.
That's amazing. I love that.
So yeah, so that's sort of like me in a nutshell, really. And obviously, I'm a naval officer, love to travel. So if I get the opportunity to travel, I will. And the only other thing, I took it up in lockdown, and I found it really good for my sort of mental well-being, but also for running and life in general, was yoga. So I'm a convertee to yoga, and I absolutely love it. And the community of yogis out there are brilliant. So I generally do 1 or 2 yoga retreats a year, leave allowance allowing. Go to Gran Canaria, do some yoga in the sun. It's brilliant. Love it.
We actually have a yoga master coming on this season, a lady called Anne CEO, who's amazing. So yeah, stay tuned for that one. But you're the third person to mention that today. I guess my fear with yoga is kind of being 6'3", 24 stone guy. Kind of getting into it might be a bit tough, but I've been told that there are easy access ways to yoga as well.
So lots of people say I can't do yoga because I'm not flexible, and I'm certainly not flexible. But the reason you do yoga is to become more flexible. So it's not about the Instagram yoga that you see with the perfect poses, where quite often they've spent hours getting that pose perfectly correct for the picture before they take it and then filter it. That's not real yoga. Real yoga is a mindset. It's about putting yourself in the moment. It's about breathing. It's about giving yourself, it's sort of like mental headroom, where all you're thinking about is the here and now. Everything else outside of the here and now is irrelevant, and you just do your thing. And if you can make the full pose, that you can, and if you can't, well, you just do what you can do. And life's a journey. So yeah, but a lot of people who've never practiced yoga are fearful of it because they think it's about perfection. It's not. It's about a journey.
What a message to bring this to a close on. I love that. But before I let you go, I need to ask you the question I ask everybody that comes on the show. So I'm now the MC of the O2 Arena in London. 20,000 people have paid their hard-earned money to come and hear you do your thing. You sat in the green room sipping a Prosecco, and I call your name. Your walk-on music bursts on. What would your walk-on music be? That song that gets you at peak state. What would the song be, and why?
This is really difficult for me because other than classical music, I don't listen to a lot of music.
Hey, classical works. Classy guy, classical music.
So classical music does work. To be honest, probably anything by Max Richter. Who's a really good. He reimagines a lot of classical music, and he's done some really good bit really recently. In fact, 2 reimaginings of the Four Seasons by Vivaldi. So it might be a bit of that. I know that's really sort of like that's really left field, isn't it?
That could work. That could be your personal brand thing going on. I love that.
But no one would expect it, would they? They would just say, "What's going on?" And then I'd turn up.
It's a memory. What can you say? So that and every other choice from season 6 will be available on the Spotify playlist right at the end of the season. So stay tuned for that. Love that. First time we've had classical gone into the list as well. So already we're breaking boundaries this season. It's cool. But for now, Captain Douggie Ward, give it up. Woo!
Thank you very much indeed.
What an amazing guest. Thank you so much for giving up your time and sharing how you did and what you did. And yeah, I'm sure everybody else would have enjoyed it as much as I did. So thank you very much, Douggie. Everybody else, that's a wrap. So please hit like, subscribe, whatever it takes to get you back here next Monday for our next wonderful episode of season 6. But for now, take care, be well, be happy. Take care, guys. Cheers. Bye-bye.